The bustling newsroom of WNYC buzzed with frenetic energy as reporters hustled about, finalizing stories and preparing for the evening broadcast. Jack Thompson, a seasoned reporter with over a decade of experience, sat at his desk, reviewing the headlines for the night's segment. The glow of the computer screen illuminated his focused expression, while the chatter of his colleagues faded into a comforting backdrop. He had built a reputation for himself, known for his dedication to the truth and his fearless pursuit of stories that mattered. "Hey, Jack, you ready to rock the airwaves?" Sarah Mitchell, his loyal producer, approached with a bright smile, her blonde hair bouncing with her enthusiastic stride. She leaned against the desk, arms crossed, clearly eager for the broadcast to begin. Jack chuckled, looking up from his notes. "As ready as I'll ever be. Just trying to make sure I don't trip over my own words tonight." Sarah, with her quick wit, replied, "You? Trip? Never. Besides, everyone knows you could read the phone book and make it sound like a Pulitzer Prize-winning piece." Jack shook his head, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I don't know about that, but thanks for the vote of confidence." He appreciated Sarah's support. She had been with him through thick and thin, always pushing him to do his best. As they walked toward the studio, Jack couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He remembered the nights spent chasing down leads, the countless interviews, and the adrenaline rush of breaking a big story. Journalism was not just a job for him, it was a passion. The world needed to know the truth, and he relished the role he played in delivering it. In the control room, the atmosphere was electric. Producers and technicians moved in a choreographed dance, ensuring everything was set for the live broadcast. Jack took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of coffee and the faint whir of machinery. He felt at home here. "5 minutes to air," a voice called out from the control desk, breaking him from his reverie. Jack took his position in front of the camera, adjusting his tie and smoothing down his shirt. He could feel the slight flutter of nerves in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. This was what he lived for. "Let's give them a show, Jack," Sarah said, her voice steadying him as she gave him an encouraging nod. The countdown began, and Jack focused on the teleprompter, ready to deliver the top stories of the day. As the red light signaled that they were live, he flashed a confident smile to the camera, his voice steady and authoritative. "Good evening, New York. I'm Jack Thompson, and tonight we have breaking news that you won't want to miss." He began to glide through the headlines, weaving in his signature flair for storytelling. The camera captured his passion, and he could almost feel the audience connecting with him. But just as he began to transition to the next segment, an urgent voice crackled in his earpiece. "Jack, hold on a second," Sarah's voice came through, laced with an unusual tension. "We need to talk." Confusion flickered across Jack's face. "What's going on?" he whispered, trying to maintain his composure on air. "Just keep going. I'll explain later," she urged, her tone suddenly serious. As he pressed on, Jack's heart raced. He could sense something was amiss. The room felt different, the energy shifting. He continued reading the script, but his mind was elsewhere, a gnawing anxiety taking root. Suddenly, Sarah cut in again, her voice urgent and unyielding. "Jack, I'm sorry. We need to let you go." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He stumbled over his next line, the shock rendering him momentarily speechless. "Wait, what? Live? Now?" Panic surged as he tried to process the reality of what was happening. The studio fell silent, eyes glued to him, and the camera zoomed in, capturing the stunned expression on his face. "Jack, Sarah began, but he interrupted. "Why? Why am I being fired?" His voice rose, a mix of disbelief and desperation. The studio lights felt unbearably hot as he grappled with the humiliation of being dismissed live on air. The control room buzzed with chaos. Producers exchanged frantic glances, and the director shouted commands. Jack's mind raced, thoughts colliding in a tumultuous storm. He had dedicated his life to this network, to journalism, and now he was being discarded like yesterday's news. "Jack, please, We can talk about this, Sarah pleaded. But he could see the sadness in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. Talk about what? You're firing me in front of millions, he exclaimed, his voice cracking. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him, and he struggled to maintain his composure, knowing that the world was watching. Jack, Sarah started again, but this time her expression was resolute. It's not just about you. There are bigger things at play. We need to— Bigger things? Jack interrupted, his frustration boiling over. I deserve to know why. I've worked too hard for this. The camera continued to roll, capturing every moment of his unraveling. Jack could feel the weight of his career slipping away, the embarrassment washing over him like a tidal wave. He took a step back, trying to regain his footing, but the ground felt unstable beneath him. Jack, just breathe, Sarah urged, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. We'll figure this out, I promise. He wanted to believe her, but the feeling of betrayal clawed at him. You promise? You're the one who just let me get fired. What's the real reason behind this? Please, just tell me. The silence that followed felt deafening, the weight of unanswered questions hanging in the air. Jack could see the concern etched on Sarah's face, her loyalty evident, but the reality of the situation was suffocating. He felt the eyes of the world upon him, judging, speculating, as he stood there, vulnerable and exposed. As the broadcast continued, Jack's mind raced with possibilities. What had he done to deserve this? Had he inadvertently crossed someone powerful? Was there something he didn't know? Some unseen force manipulating the strings behind the scenes? With a final deep breath, he straightened his back, fighting to regain the composure that had always defined him. I need to know the truth, Sarah. I can't just walk away like this. The camera cut away, and the studio atmosphere shifted as the producer signaled they were going to a commercial break. Jack stepped back from the desk, his heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was a reporter, a seeker of truth, and he couldn't let this moment define him. As he looked at Sarah, he saw the determination mirrored in her eyes. Let's figure this out, she said, her voice firm. I won't leave you behind, Jack. We'll get to the bottom of this. He nodded slowly, a flicker of hope igniting within him. No matter what it took, he would uncover the truth behind his dismissal. It was time to fight back, and he wouldn't do it alone. Together, they would shine a light on the shadows lurking within the network and reveal the conspiracy that had led to his shocking ousting. The battle was just beginning, and Jack was ready to take it on. As the lights dimmed in the newsroom, Jack Thompson stood there, still reeling from the abrupt termination that had just unfolded live on air. The cacophony of ringing phones, hurried footsteps, and muted conversations surrounded him, but it all felt distant, like a world he was no longer part of. He had just been publicly humiliated, stripped of his dignity, and all he could feel was a simmering tide of betrayal that threatened to drown him. He marched down the corridor toward Mr. Jenkins's office, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and confusion. Jack had been a seasoned reporter, respected and trusted by his colleagues. None of it made sense. How could this happen? He knocked sharply on the door, the sound echoing in the tense atmosphere. Come in, a muffled voice called from within. Jack pushed the door open, his knuckles still stinging from the impact. Mr. Jenkins sat behind a polished mahogany desk, papers strewn about haphazardly, a half-empty coffee cup perched precariously on the edge. The man looked up, his expression a calculated mix of concern and indifference. Jack, Don't jack me, Jack interrupted, his voice rising. You fired me live on national television. I deserve an explanation. Mr. Jenkins leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching into a feigned smile. It's not personal, Jack. You know how these things work. There's a lot of pressure from above. We had to make a tough call. A tough call? Jack's incredulity was palpable. You're telling me that after years of hard work, dedication, and loyalty, I'm just a number on a spreadsheet to you? What pressure? Who's pulling the strings? Mr. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Jack's penetrating gaze. I can't discuss the specifics. It's complicated. Complicated? Jack echoed, his frustration boiling over. This is a complete betrayal. I deserve to know why this is happening. I worked with you for years. I trusted you. The silence between them thickened, punctuated only by the distant buzz of the newsroom. Finally, Mr. Jenkins sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to alleviate a headache. There are forces at play that you're not aware of. Just lay low for a while, okay? This could blow over. Lay low? You want me to just sit back and accept this? You think I'm going to let this go? Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. I want the truth, and I will find it if I have to dig through every piece of dirt in this place. With that, he turned sharply and stormed out of the office, leaving Mr. Jenkins's vague words echoing in his mind. He felt a surge of determination. Jack had faced challenges before, but this felt different. There was a shadow looming over his career, and he didn't intend to let it swallow him whole. As he exited the building, the late evening air hit him like a cold slap, grounding him in reality. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Sarah Mitchell's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice laced with concern. Jack, is that you? What's going on? I was just fired, Sarah. Live on air. I need to meet. Now. Hang tight. I'll be right there, she replied, her tone firm. Jack paced on the sidewalk, his thoughts racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that his firing was part of a much larger scheme. Sarah had been his producer for years, a trusted ally in the chaotic world of news reporting. If anyone could help him navigate this mess, it was her. A few minutes later, Sarah arrived, her brow furrowed with worry. What the hell happened, Jack? I saw part of the broadcast. It was a disaster. I don't know why it happened, but I'm going to find out, he declared, his voice steadying. I confronted Jenkins, but he was evasive. There's something going on, something big. Sarah crossed her arms, her expression shifting from concern to fierce determination. You're not going to let this slide, are you? We need to dig deeper. Exactly, Jack said, his eyes lighting up with resolve. I need your help. We need to look into everything. Any whispers of corruption or favoritism. There has to be something that connects my firing to whatever's brewing behind the scenes. I'll make some calls, Sarah said, her tone resolute. We can start by reaching out to some contacts we trust. If there's anything unusual, we'll find it. As they walked through the bustling streets of New York, Jack felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. It was a dangerous game they were about to play, but he couldn't shake the feeling that uncovering the truth was his only path forward. The weight of betrayal fueled his resolve, mingling with the adrenaline coursing through his veins. That night, they sat in Sarah's cramped apartment, surrounded by a mess of papers, files, and empty coffee cups. The glow of their laptops illuminated the room like a beacon of determination. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, lost in thought. Let's think this through, he said, tapping his fingers on the table. Who stands to gain from my dismissal? Who would want to silence me? Could be anyone, Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. But remember, you've been covering some major stories. Maybe someone didn't like the direction you were taking. We need to look at your recent reports. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of his past investigations. I did some digging into the network's financials last month. There were discrepancies that didn't add up, and I was about to go further. Maybe that's why they decided to cut me loose. Let's start there, Sarah suggested, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up old reports. We'll track down any connections that might link back to Jenkins or anyone else in management. They can't just sweep this under the rug. As the hours passed, they pieced together a network of potential leads, anonymous whispers that hinted at corruption within the network. Jack felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. There was something exhilarating about investigating the very institution that had just betrayed him. Jack, look at this, Sarah called, her voice breaking through his thoughts. I just got a tip from a former intern. They mentioned some shady dealings involving advertising contracts and favoritism. This could be connected to why you were let go." Jack leaned closer to the screen, his heart racing. "This is it. We need to follow up on this." "Let's do it carefully," Sarah cautioned. "If we're right, we could be stepping into dangerous territory, but I'm with you every step of the way." "Good," Jack said, a newfound confidence surging within him. "I won't just sit back and let them silence me. We're going to uncover this scandal, and we'll make sure the truth comes out." As the night wore on, determination eclipsed the humiliation he had felt just hours before. He was no longer a victim. He was a journalist on a mission. And with Sarah by his side, he would expose the darkness lurking within the network, paving the way for a new chapter in his career, one that would be defined by integrity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Jack and Sarah sat huddled in the dimly lit corner of a small cafe just a few blocks from the bustling newsroom. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but neither of them had the appetite to indulge. Instead, they were fueled by a mix of adrenaline and the weight of the investigation they had embarked upon. Jack leaned forward, his hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to find someone who's willing to talk," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. "There are too many whispers about what's been happening behind the scenes. If we want to get to the bottom of this, we need evidence, proof that can't be brushed under the rug." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the cafe as if expecting someone to materialize from the shadows. "I know a few people who might be able to help, but they're skittish. With everything that's been happening, they're afraid to speak out." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that, but we can't let fear dictate our next moves. We have to show them that they're not alone in this. Maybe if we frame it right, they'll see that speaking up is the only way to protect themselves." Just then, their phones buzzed simultaneously. Both glanced at the screens, and Jack's heart sank as he read the anonymous message that had come through. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." He read it aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What the hell? This is getting serious." Sarah's eyes widened, but she quickly masked her shock with determination. "We can't let them intimidate us. This is exactly why we need to push harder. If they're resorting to threats, it means we're onto something. They're scared." Jack looked into Sarah's eyes, finding solace in her unwavering resolve. "You're right. Let's set up those interviews and gather whatever we can. We need names, dates, anything that connects the dots back to Collins." With a plan in mind, they finished their coffees and ventured back into the chaos of the city, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and purpose. They reached out to their contacts, carefully selecting those who might have insider knowledge about the network's darker dealings. Jack was meticulous in his approach, aware that one misstep could jeopardize everything. Later that week, they arranged to meet with a former intern named Mark, who had been working at the network during some of its most tumultuous times. They chose a secluded park where the noise of the city faded into the background, allowing them to speak freely. As they settled onto a bench, Mark appeared, his demeanor anxious but resolute. "Thanks for meeting us, Mark," Jack said, offering a reassuring smile. "We know this isn't easy, but we're looking for the truth about what's happening at the network." Mark ran a hand through his hair, glancing around as if fearing he was being watched. "I've been hearing things, whispers about how stories are manipulated, changed to fit certain narratives. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw some of the edits being made to my pieces. It was like they were trying to steer public opinion." "What kind of edits?" Sarah pressed, eager to dig deeper. "Sometimes they would cut out key facts, or reframe the entire story to favor certain executives or sponsors," Mark explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember one instance where a major political scandal was reported, but the context was twisted to make it seem less severe. Ms. Collins was behind a lot of it. She wanted to protect her interests, and that meant controlling the narrative." Jack felt a fire ignite within him. "Do you have any documentation? Emails, drafts, anything that could help us prove this?" Mark hesitated, glancing around nervously. I might have some old emails saved on my personal laptop, but I'm scared, okay? If they find out I talked to you, I don't know what they'll do. We understand, Mark, Sarah replied, her tone empathetic yet firm. But this isn't just about you anymore. This is about exposing corruption that affects everyone. If you can help us, it could make a real difference. After a long pause, Mark nodded slowly. All right, I'll send you what I have, but you have to promise me that you'll be careful. If they catch wind of this, it could get ugly. As they parted ways, Jack and Sarah exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and apprehension coursing through them. They had taken a significant step forward, but the risks were now more pronounced than ever. Back at the office, the tension was palpable. Jack and Sarah gathered around their makeshift workspace, cluttered with notes, articles, and the growing list of names connected to the network's corruption. Jack's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of information, determined to uncover the truth. Do you think we're getting close? Sarah asked, her voice breaking the silence. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I hope so, but the closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes. If Collins is as powerful as we think, she won't let this go without a fight. Just then, Jack's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another anonymous message. This time it read, "You're digging a grave for yourself. Step back before it's too late." He showed the message to Sarah, who frowned deeply. This is escalating. They're getting desperate, and that means we're onto something big. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the threats bearing down on him. We can't back down now. If we're going to expose this, we need to be strategic. We have to keep digging, but we also need to protect ourselves. Sarah nodded, her resolve unshaken. Let's make a plan. We'll continue reaching out to our contacts, but we'll also set up secure communication channels. No more unsecured texts. Agreed, Jack said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Let's gather everything we can from Mark and anyone else who might have information. We need to build a solid case. As they worked late into the night, the city outside continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the dangerous game unfolding within its heart. Jack and Sarah knew they were on the cusp of something monumental, but with each step, the stakes grew higher. With threats looming over them, they understood that the pursuit of truth often came at a cost, and they were prepared to pay it. The sun had dipped below the Manhattan skyline, casting a golden hue across the streets, as Jack Thompson and Sarah Mitchell made their way to a discreet diner on the Upper West Side. The neon lights buzzed and flickered, creating an ambiance that was a welcome distraction from the chaos of the news world they had just left behind. They settled into a corner booth, the vinyl seats squeaking slightly as they slid in, and Jack pulled out a wrinkled notepad filled with hastily scribbled notes. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He glanced around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. The weight of their investigation loomed over him like a dark cloud, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sarah leaned forward, her auburn hair falling over her shoulder. "We have to do this. If what the whistleblower said is true, we could be onto something massive. Jack, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about the integrity of the entire network." Jack nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "But what if we're wrong? What if this blows up in our faces? I could lose everything again. Or you could expose a corrupt system that's been silencing voices like yours," she replied, her green eyes fierce with determination. "You're not the only one who's been affected by this. Look at all the stories that never made it to air because of Miss Collins and her cronies." He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The diner was bustling with activity around them, yet their corner felt isolated, like a sanctuary amid the storm brewing outside. "I just don't want to put you in danger, Sarah. You've done so much for me already." "Stop it," she interrupted, a hint of exasperation in her tone. "I'm in this with you. We're a team, remember? Besides, I've faced down bullies before. This is no different." Jack couldn't help but smile at her tenacity. "You're right. I guess I just need to focus on the facts. What did the whistleblower say exactly? Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a notes app, tapping away. Her name is Lisa, a junior producer who worked under Collins. She said, Collins has been manipulating news content to favor certain sponsors and advertisers, which is why your investigative pieces were getting killed. You were getting too close to the truth. Jack's heart raced at her words. So, my firing wasn't just a random decision? Exactly. You were a threat to her operation, Jack, Sarah replied, her fingers flying across the screen. Lisa also mentioned a few other names involved, high-profile executives who've been complicit in this corruption. They're all in on it together. Do we have enough evidence? Jack asked, leaning in. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. He'd always known the media industry had its dark corners, but to be embroiled in such a conspiracy felt surreal. More than enough, Sarah asserted, her confidence infectious. We have Lisa's testimony, and I've been gathering documents and emails that have been leaked to us. If we can corroborate everything, this could blow the lid off the entire operation. Just then, a waitress approached their table, her notepad ready. What can I get you to? Coffee black, Jack said, his focus still on the conversation. Same for me, thanks, Sarah added, her attention unwavering. As the waitress walked away, Jack took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. So, what's our next move? Sarah raised an eyebrow, a smirk hinting at the corners of her mouth. We go public. We need to prepare a full exposé with all the evidence we've gathered. Once we have everything lined up, we can approach a few trusted journalists and see if they'll help us get it out there. Jack's brow furrowed. But what if they're connected to Collins? What if they warn her? Then we'll have to be smarter than they are, Sarah replied, her tone resolute. We can't let fear dictate our actions. Remember what you told me when we first met? The truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. He chuckled softly, recalling their early days in the newsroom when they shared endless late-night discussions about the ethics of journalism. I was a lot more naive back then. Maybe, she said, her expression softening. But you still believe in the power of the truth. That hasn't changed. Just as they were getting lost in their thoughts, the waitress returned, placing 2 steaming mugs of coffee before them. Jack wrapped his hands around the cup, savoring the warmth as he looked at Sarah. You're right. We have to do this, for everyone who's been silenced. The determination in his voice ignited something within Sarah. We'll do it together. And remember, we're not just fighting for you anymore. We're fighting for every reporter who's been pushed aside for not conforming to their agenda. Jack took a sip of his coffee, feeling the heat wash over him, matching the fiery resolve building in his chest. Let's finalize our evidence tonight. We can draft the article and outline our findings. I want to make sure we cover every angle. As they began to jot down their thoughts and evidence, the diner buzzed with life around them. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversations, and the occasional laughter made it feel like a normal night. But for Jack and Sarah, this was anything but ordinary. They were on the precipice of something monumental. Hours passed as they meticulously organized their notes, their conversation flowing seamlessly between fear and hope. The weight of what they were about to undertake settled heavily upon them, yet the thrill of pursuing justice invigorated their spirits. Jack, Sarah said, breaking the silence as she flipped through her notes. What if they retaliate? What's your plan if this goes south? He leaned back, contemplating her question. The fear of retaliation was real, and he had seen firsthand how powerful figures in the media could crush dissenting voices. I guess I'll have to be ready for anything. I've already lost my job. What more can they take from me? Your reputation, your credibility, she countered, her voice steady. It's not just about you anymore. We're stepping into dangerous territory. I know, he replied, a frown forming on his face. But if we don't stand up now, who will? We can't let them silence us. Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. Then it's settled. We'll go public. But we need a backup plan, just in case. And they spent the remainder of the night crafting their exposé, the atmosphere charged with urgency and determination. As the first light of dawn crept through the diner windows, Jack felt a sense of clarity wash over him. They were ready. As they stepped out into the brisk morning air, Jack felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. But for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. They were about to take a stand, and regardless of the outcome, he knew he was no longer alone in this fight. Sarah was right beside him, and together they would uncover the truth that had been buried for far too long. Jack Thompson paced nervously in the cramped confines of his apartment, his mind racing as he clutched his phone. The walls, adorned with framed photographs from his years as a reporter, bore witness to his struggles and triumphs. He felt the weight of his mentor's voice echoing in his mind. You know the industry, Jack. It's not just about the truth. It's about who controls the narrative. Be careful. The call from Martin Edwards, his longtime mentor, had come just moments before they were set to air the exposé that could change everything. Martin's warning was clear. Powerful figures were not easily toppled, and the fallout from their actions could be severe. Jack glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking down to the moment they had been tirelessly preparing for. Are you ready? Sarah Mitchell, his loyal producer, entered the room, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. Her auburn hair caught the light, and her resolve was palpable. She had stood by Jack through every setback, her dedication unwavering. Jack paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. I just got off the phone with Martin, he said, his voice edged with uncertainty. He thinks we're walking into a lion's den. He believes they'll come after us. Sarah crossed her arms, her brow furrowing. And what? We just back down? After everything we've uncovered? We owe it to the people who trust us to give them the truth. Jack looked into her eyes, the fire within them igniting a spark in his own heart. You're right. We can't let fear dictate our actions. This is bigger than us. It's about integrity, about holding those in power accountable. Exactly, she said, her confidence bolstering his own. Let's do this. We're not just exposing Ms. Collins. We're shedding light on the corruption that plagues the entire network. They took their places behind the cameras, the studio bustling with activity. Jack could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as the countdown to live broadcast began. The familiar hum of the studio, the chatter of the crew, the flicker of the lights, it all felt like home, even in the face of adversity. As the director signaled for silence, Jack adjusted his tie, his heart pounding. In 3, 2, 1, the red light above the camera blinked on, and he was thrust into the spotlight. Good evening. I'm Jack Thompson, he began, his voice steady, the weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy blanket. Tonight, we bring you a story that has been hidden from the public eye for far too long, a tale of corruption, manipulation, and the lengths some will go to protect their interests. As he spoke, images flashed on the screen behind him, clips of high-profile figures, news reports, and evidence that had been painstakingly gathered. Jack felt the energy in the room shift, the tension palpable as he delved into the investigation. Recent findings suggest that Ms. Collins, a top executive at our network, has been involved in unethical practices, using her position to manipulate news stories for personal gain, he continued, the words flowing from him like a river of conviction. This has led to the dismissal of dedicated journalists, including myself, who dared to uncover the truth. The reaction was immediate. Jack could hear gasps from the crew, the audience in the studio captivated by the gravity of the revelations. He pressed on, detailing the evidence they had compiled, the whistleblower accounts, and the anonymous tips that had led them to this moment. When he mentioned the threats they had received, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Sarah, monitoring the social media feeds from her control panel, turned to him, her eyes wide with excitement. It's trending, Jack. People are reacting. This is huge. The studio erupted into a frenzy as the broadcast continued, the public outrage palpable. Jack felt a swell of pride for the work they had done, the truth finally clawing its way to the surface. He knew they were risking everything, but at that moment, it felt worth it. As the segment wrapped up, Jack's heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had laid it all bare. The truth was out there, and now it was up to the world to respond. The camera cut to a commercial break, and the studio erupted into a mix of cheers and anxious chatter. "Did we really just do that?" Sarah exclaimed, a grin spreading across her face. "We went live with the truth." Jack nodded, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "I can't believe it either, but we need to prepare for the backlash. Ms. Collins won't take this lying down." "Let her come at us," Sarah replied, her tone fierce. "We have the evidence, and the public is on our side. This is just the beginning." The next few hours were a blur. News outlets were covering their story, social media was ablaze with reactions, and Jack's name began to trend positively as people rallied behind him. It was a surreal experience, watching the world react to their hard work and determination. Yet, amidst the triumph, Jack felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He knew that with every victory came potential repercussions. Ms. Collins was a formidable opponent, and he could almost feel her calculating response from thousands of miles away. Later that evening, as Jack scrolled through his phone, he noticed a flood of messages from former colleagues, all expressing their support. "Jack, you're a hero," one read. "We're proud of you," another chimed in. It warmed his heart, but he also felt a weight of responsibility. "Look at this," Sarah said, standing beside him, her phone in hand. "People are sharing their own stories of corruption within the network. They're standing with us." Jack couldn't help but smile. This is what journalism is supposed to be about, giving a voice to the voiceless. But as the night wore on, the exhilaration began to fade, replaced by a sense of foreboding. Jack and Sarah sat down at a small table in the corner of the studio, the glow of computer screens illuminating their faces. "What's next?" Jack asked, his voice quiet as the reality of their actions began to sink in. "We prepare for the inevitable confrontation," Sarah replied. "They'll come after us, Jack. We need to be ready." Jack nodded, determination hardening in his chest. "We'll gather more evidence if we need to. We can't let them silence us again." As they worked late into the night, drafting plans and compiling further evidence, Jack felt a sense of camaraderie with Sarah that he hadn't experienced in a long time. They were in this together, two warriors fighting against a corrupt system, and he knew they would face whatever came next, side by side. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Together, they would shine a light into the darkness, and for that, he was ready to fight. Jack Thompson stood at the head of the conference room, a stack of files in his hands, his heart pounding against his ribcage. The walls were decorated with framed accolades and glossy images of past news anchors, a stark reminder of the legacy he was fighting to uphold. Around the polished mahogany table sat the network's top executives, their expressions a mix of skepticism and annoyance. Among them, Ms. Collins leaned back in her chair, arms crossed defensively, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Jack prepared to unveil the evidence that could change everything. "Thank you all for joining me on such short notice," Jack began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He glanced at Sarah, his producer, who stood by the door, her eyes wide with encouragement. She had been invaluable during this tumultuous period, and he wanted to make her proud. "I know this may be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's vital we address the issues plaguing our network." "Get to the point, Jack," Mr. Jenkins interrupted, his tone dismissive. "You've had your moment in the spotlight, and now it's time to move on." Jack felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but pushed back against the rising tide of frustration. "With all due respect, Mr. Jenkins, this isn't just about me. It's about the integrity of our news organization." He placed the files on the table and opened the first folder, revealing a series of documents detailing the unethical practices orchestrated by Ms. Collins. What I've uncovered goes beyond mere favoritism. It's a conspiracy that undermines the very principles of journalism. Ms. Collins leaned forward, her expression shifting from smug confidence to thinly veiled irritation. "You're grasping at straws, Jack. You've been out of the game for too long. The public doesn't care about your grievances." Jack felt a surge of determination. He flipped through the pages and pointed to the first piece of evidence. This memo outlines a directive to manipulate news coverage for personal gain, specifically regarding the purchase of a major tech company. This isn't just unethical, it's illegal. The executives exchanged glances, their initial skepticism beginning to waver. Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. "If we don't address this, we risk losing our credibility and trust among our viewers. The public deserves to know the truth." "Enough!" Ms. Collins barked, slamming her hand on the table. "You think you can waltz in here, throw around accusations, and ruin my reputation? You're a washed-up reporter trying to make a name for himself again." Jack met her glare, refusing to back down. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's reputation. I'm here to save it, ours and yours. But if we continue to ignore these issues, then this network will crumble." The tension in the room escalated, silence hanging heavily in the air. Just as it seemed they might dismiss Jack's claims, a knock echoed from the door. Sarah opened it, revealing a familiar face. James, a former employee who had left the network under mysterious circumstances. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with determination. "James, what are you doing here?" Jenkins asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I have something important to say," James replied, stepping into the room. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Jack's heart raced. This was the break they needed. "James, you know the truth about what's been happening. Please, share what you know." James took a deep breath, his voice steadying. "I worked closely with Ms. Collins during my time here, and I witnessed firsthand the corruption she orchestrated. I have documents, emails, everything you need to prove that she manipulated stories and rigged the system to benefit herself." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Ms. Collins' expression transformed from annoyance to sheer panic. "You don't know what you're doing, James. This isn't just a game." Jack seized the moment. "This is the truth, Ms. Collins. You can no longer deflect blame. It's time for accountability." James produced a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to Jack. "Everything I've gathered is on here. You have to show them. The public needs to know." The room erupted into chaos as the executives began whispering among themselves, their previous confidence crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Ms. Collins slammed her hands on the table, her voice rising above the din. "This is a witch hunt! Jack, you're going to ruin us all." "You're already ruining us, Ms. Collins," Jack replied, his voice unwavering. "But it doesn't have to end this way. You can come clean now or let the truth come out in a way you can't control." As the room buzzed with anxiety, Mr. Jenkins stood, his face pale. "We need to take a break. This isn't how we conduct business." "How else do you propose we conduct it?" Jack shot back. "By ignoring the truth? By burying it under layers of deceit? No, this is how we conduct business. By facing our failures head on." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy fog. Jack felt the weight of their gazes upon him, a mix of fear and realization. He had stepped into the lion's den, but he wasn't leaving without a fight. "Jack," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the tension. "You're doing it. They're listening." With renewed determination, Jack turned back to the executives. "We can be better. We can rebuild trust with our audience, but only if we choose to be honest. It's not too late." "I'll take the fall for this," Ms. Collins spat, her composure slipping. "You think I'm afraid of a little backlash? You have no idea what you're up against." "But we know what you're up to," James interjected, his voice rising. "And the public deserves to know the truth about your actions." As the meeting reached a fever pitch, Jack felt a wave of hope wash over him. The executives were no longer dismissing him. They were considering their options. Ms. Collins was cornered, and the walls were closing in. Finally, Mr. Jenkins raised his hand to silence the room. "We will review the evidence provided by both Jack and James. We're not making any decisions now, but we will investigate further." Jack nodded, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. "Thank you. This is a step in the right direction." As he walked out of the conference room, he felt Sarah's hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Jack. You stood up to them." "I couldn't have done it without you," Jack replied, gratitude washing over him. "This is just the beginning." With Ms. Collins exposed and the network beginning to reckon with its own failings, Jack stepped into the bustling hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the energy of the newsroom pulsed around him. He had faced the storm and come out on the other side, not unscathed, but with a newfound sense of purpose. He understood now that true success wasn't defined by ratings or accolades. It was about integrity, friendship, and having the courage to fight for what was right. As he glanced back at the conference room, he felt a sense of closure. The battle was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next.